This is the third part in a three-part series of understanding how prices emerge to coordinate human behavior. And in this video, we're going to bring supply and demand together to understand equilibrium prices and what that means, and then changes in our market here. So as we explained before, we can explain the demand and supply of some good or service mathematically. In this case, I'm going to use the same equations. Quantity demanded is equal to 10 minus P. Quantity supplied is equal to P. We can show this graph or verbally through the schedule of how much consumers are willing to buy at different prices and how much suppliers are willing to bring to the market at different prices based on these two equations. So for example, at a price of 0, quantity demanded will be 10, quantity supplied will be 0. At a price of 6, quantity demanded will be 4, quantity supplied will be 6. At a price of 9, quantity demanded will be 1, quantity supplied will be 9. At a price of 10, quantity demanded will be 0, quantity supplied will be 10. And we can also show this graphically using again our quantity on the x-axis from 0 to 10 units, price on the y-axis from 0 to $10, and we can plot out different points from this schedule. So we'll start with at a price of 0, 10 units are demanded. At a price of 10, 0 units are demanded. This gives us our intercepts for the demand curve. We can then look at $3 and we'll see that consumers are willing to purchase up to 7 units. At a price of $8, consumers are willing to purchase up to 2 units. And at a price of $5, consumers are willing to buy 5 units. We can also plot out some points. This, we strike our line through our demand curve and see that our demand curve represents how much consumers are willing to buy at different prices. And again, the demand curve is downward sloping, representing diminishing marginal social benefit of whatever this good is. The more of something we have, the less benefit an additional unit gives us, and therefore it's downward sloping. We can also now plot out the supply curve. We start at a price of 0, 0 units are supplied. At a price of 10, 10 units are supplied. At a price of 8, 8 units will be supplied. And at a price of 3, 3 units will be supplied. And at a price of 5, 5 units will be supplied. And then we strike our supply curve through here, and again the supply curve represents how much suppliers are willing to bring to the market at different prices, and it's upward sloping because of the increasing marginal opportunity cost of resources being used to produce whatever good this is. So again, if we took this as a market for orange juice, the more orange juice we have, the less valuable additional units are to us, and in addition, the more oranges we direct towards producing orange juice, there are fewer oranges to be used elsewhere, and they become increasingly more important to us. And this gives us this unique point of an equilibrium at 5 units at $5. What this tells us is it's at this point exactly that the marginal social benefit is equal to the marginal social cost. And we will come back to that in a little bit and see what's important about that in just a minute. Above the demand curve, at any price quantity combination within that blue triangle, consumers are unwilling to purchase. So for example, at a price of $9, consumers are not willing to purchase a second unit, because if we look to the right in the chart, we see that the value to the second unit, the marginal value to consumers, is only $8. So they're not going to pay $9 for something that they value only at $8. Similarly, beneath the supply curve, this includes the complete red triangle plus the purple that was made on the right by combining the demand and supply triangles. Producers are unwilling to supply at any price below their supply curve. In this case here, for $1, suppliers are not willing to bring a second unit to the market. Again, we look at the chart to the right and see that the second unit costs suppliers an additional $2 to produce. The marginal cost of that second unit is $2. Therefore, if consumers are only willing to pay $1 for it, they will not bring that second unit to the market. In the white area, consumers are willing to purchase and producers are willing to supply. So that the white triangle is the area where there are gains from trade to both parties, and both consumers and suppliers are willing to bring to the market and purchase any price quantity combination within that white triangle. So for example, at a price of $7, consumers are willing to purchase the second unit. Again, at $7, they value that second unit at they value that second unit at $8. They're willing to pay $7 for it, and suppliers are also willing to supply that second unit for $7. It only costs them $2 to produce it. Their marginal cost is $2. So therefore, that $7 for the second unit is a price quantity combination both consumers are willing to buy and producers are willing to supply. Similarly, at a price of $3, consumers are willing to purchase that second unit. They value the second unit at $8. They would certainly pay $3 for it. And suppliers, their marginal cost of producing that second unit is only $2. If they receive $3 for it, they will supply it. So anywhere within this white region is where suppliers and demanders are both better off by producing and purchasing. To the right in this purple area is the area where both consumers and producers are unwilling to purchase and unwilling to supply. If we look at this point here at $6 for the 8th unit, well, consumers only value the 8th unit at $2. They're not willing to pay $6 for it. Suppliers are only, it costs suppliers $8 to produce that 8th unit. They're not willing to accept $6 for it. So neither supplier nor demander are willing to operate within that purple region. Let's take a price of $8. If the price is currently $8 for some good or service, we can see that suppliers are willing to bring 8 units to the market. Consumers are only willing to purchase 2 units at $8. This means we have a surplus. There is more that producers want to bring to the market than what consumers are willing to buy, and we call this a surplus. When this happens, in order to sell this excess supply, producers have to lower their prices, which induces consumers to buy more. Now in this case here, if there are actually 8 units in the market, consumers only value that 8th unit at $2, that price would have to fall along that demand curve to $2. But these lower prices will induce more consumers to buy more of these units. Similarly, if the price is $3, at $3 suppliers are only willing to bring 3 units to the market, and consumers are wanting to purchase 7 units. Now in this case we have a shortage. Consumers want more than what's being produced in this market. Lines will form. Whatever happens, consumers start bidding up the price for these units, which causes suppliers to bring more of these units to the market in order to get rid of the shortage. So what we see is there's a natural tendency towards that equilibrium. When there is currently a surplus, or when there is a shortage, the price is higher than equilibrium or the price is lower than equilibrium, there's a natural tendency towards that equilibrium, to move back towards that equilibrium. Self-interest directs producers and consumers back towards that equilibrium. We can look at one other way of seeing this. Let's say currently there are 8 units in the market. At 8 units on the market, suppliers want to bring 8 units and charge $8. Consumers are only willing to pay $2 for that second unit. Therefore, suppliers are going to lose money if they're currently producing 8 units. Consumers will only pay $2 for that 8th unit. Suppliers cost them $8 to produce that second unit, the 8th unit. Therefore, there's a natural tendency to reduce output. If a supplier is currently producing 8 units, they're going to reduce their output back towards that equilibrium of 5. Similarly, if they're currently producing just 2 units, consumers value that second unit at $8. Suppliers only cost them $2 to produce that second unit. Therefore, there is profit motive for them to continue increasing output. Consumers are willing to pay more than their cost of production. And what we see is there's a natural tendency towards this equilibrium of 5 units at $5. To see this, let's take a look at something with this. Right now we have this equilibrium of $5 and 5 units. Total consumer value is $37.50. We saw this before in the demand curve. This is the area under the demand curve up to the amount that consumers are willing to purchase. In this case here it's 5 units, and they're receiving a total value of $37.50. In order to purchase these 5 units, they have to pay a supplier $25. 5 units at $5 each is $25. They're supplying that to the producers, and therefore their consumer surplus is $12.50. Consumer surplus is the value consumers receive above and beyond what they pay for some item. In this case here, they receive $37.50 worth of value. It only costs them $25 to produce it. Their surplus is $12.50. For the supplier, they incur total variable costs of $12.50. Again, variable costs are the sum of marginal costs. The marginal cost of the first item is $1. Marginal cost of producing the second item is $2. Marginal cost of producing the third item is $3. On down the line, that sums to, actually It won't be 1250, but that's because of the triangles that are not, we're using discrete numbers instead of continuous. When we take the area under the supply curve and above the x-axis, it comes to $12.50. And those are the total variable costs of the firm to supply 5 units to the market. They receive $25 in revenue. That means they earn surplus of $12.50. That consumer and producer surplus was represented by the white triangle earlier. Those are the gains from trade, and that's why consumers and producers are willing to trade within that area, because both, at least one would be better off without the other being worse off. Both tend to be better off. Now, what is unique about this equilibrium? Well, again, the marginal social benefit of that last item consumed is exactly equal to the marginal social cost of producing it. If we're to the right, the marginal social cost of producing, say, the 8th unit exceeds the marginal social benefit, and that's a wasted resource, and we saw how forces tend to push us towards that equilibrium. But we want to look at something that's kind of unique. The equilibrium implies that A, there's perfect information. As a supplier, I know exactly who's coming in, when, and how much they will buy it every minute, and therefore I can serve them. For consumers, they understand prices everywhere. There are no transactions costs, and therefore they're able to have this equilibrium where there is no excess or surplus or shortage. Think of a steel bowl with a marble in it. Equilibrium implies that that marble is just sitting there motionless at the bottom, and the steel bowl is motionless. But in reality, that's not the case. That steel bowl is always being jostled and moved around, and that marble is spinning around the bowl. But it's tending towards the bottom of the bowl. Gravity is pushing it towards the bottom of that bowl. Well, in markets, it's the same thing. Market forces are dynamic and they're moving around a lot, but they are tending towards that equilibrium and pushing us towards that equilibrium, but we're likely never at that equilibrium. It doesn't happen. We live in a dynamic world, not a static world. Equilibrium implies stasis, and we don't see that. If we really had this equilibrium, think of what happens when I go to a grocery store. The shelves are empty, so if I need to get a loaf of bread, when I walk into the grocery store, all the shelves are empty. I walk right back to the bread aisle, and once I get there and reach my hand out, a loaf of bread all of a sudden pops out. Supply equals demand. But we don't see that. What we see is we see an excess supply of food at the grocery stores. We see an excess number of cars on dealer car lots. We see an excess amount of clothes when we get to a clothing store. On the opposite side, we may see shortages. When I call my dentist to schedule an appointment, they don't say, well, come on in, we're ready for you, supply equals demand. They tell me I have to wait 2 or 3 weeks in order to get an appointment. We may see shortages. So this equilibrium is an unrealistic construct. It's something we don't see. But what's important about it is the following. In order to make consumers better off, suppliers have an oversupply. They tend to have an oversupply of stock in their shelves. So when you go to the grocery store, again, there's an oversupply of goods, let's say 5.5 units, but at this price, consumers only want 4.5 units, so we have an inventory that's building up. And this inventory makes me better off as a consumer, because if we had this equilibrium, I'd walk into a store, I'd reach my hand to get something, say a gallon of milk, but all of a sudden it's not there and they tell me they can't meet that. Now I have to go to other stores to try to find it, so I'm driving all around town looking for milk, but I only pay $5. Here I'm willing to pay $5.50 to walk into a store, and the store manager doesn't know what I'm going to buy. They don't know how much I'm going to buy when I determine. They don't even know when I'm coming in, but they have an excess supply just in case that happens. I'm willing to pay a little more, and I'm made better off. Now in 1988, Sam Walton spent $20 million on a satellite uplink system that connected his stores with suppliers. So every time an item was scanned, the supplier gets information that says this store in this city, whatever it is, just sold a gallon of milk, and it needs to be replenished the next day, or a shirt, or a tent, whatever it is. And this allowed Walmart to have a reduced stock, a reduced inventory. And they were able to lower the price. They were able to narrow that margin of excess supply with just-in-time delivery and better supply chain management. And this is what entrepreneurs can make a lot of money doing, reducing those transactions costs, reducing those information costs, and there's a natural tendency to move towards that equilibrium. We may never be there, but they're entrepreneurial endeavors to get us closer to that perfect efficiency. Now, we talked about what's held constant within a supply curve, and on a demand curve. And it's really important now when we put these together, we can understand how markets are going to change and what will happen to prices due to changing events. So when we looked at our supply curve, we said there will be technology is held constant. Any change in technology will cause the supply curve to increase. Resource costs are held constant. Natural disasters, number of suppliers, and expectations of future price changes. Along a demand curve, we hold income constant, tastes, prices of other goods, number of consumers, and expectations. If any of these change, we will see a change in the market equilibrium. So let's start at a price of $5 and a quantity of $5. What happens in this market when demand changes? Well, let's say incomes increase. As a result of the incomes increasing, demand for this good increases. This will be a normal good, so the demand increases. If we're talking about housing or cars, the demand for housing and cars increases. Therefore, the price goes from $5 to $6, and we now buy more units. So demand change due to an increase in income. The demand curve shifted up. Notice what happened to the quantity supplied. As a result of this higher price due to increasing demand, suppliers are willing to bring more to the market. That's movement along the supply curve. So that's a change in quantity supplied. Notice also that this increase in demand caused price and quantity to move together. They both increased. Both price and quantity increased when the demand curve shifted upwards. Let's compare that to the following. Let's say this is a market for orange juice as we used before, and a freeze destroys the orange crop. Well, in this case here, there's a shift in the decrease in supply. This causes the price of oranges or orange juice to increase, and there'll be less orange juice on the market due to this destruction of oranges. So again, supply shifted due to a natural disaster. This caused a decrease in the quantity demanded. Now again, the supply shifting up caused the price of orange juice to rise. As a result of this higher price, consumers demanded less orange juice, but it's not a change to the demand curve. It's movement along the demand curve, which is a decrease in quantity demanded. Notice also now in this case here, when the supply curve shifted left, price increased just like demand. We saw the change in the increase in demand, price increased. But here, the quantity sold in the market decreased. It went from 5 to 4. The price went from 5 to 6, but quantity went the opposite direction. Instead of increasing, it decreased from 5 units to 4 units. We can look at one more. Let's say that this is an inferior good. As consumers' income increases, demand for an inferior good falls, and therefore the price quantity equilibrium decreases. Notice again, price and quantity move in the same direction. When demand changes, price and quantity will move in the same direction. In this case here, a decrease in demand results in a lower price, fewer goods being sold in that market. This is movement along the supply curve, so it's a change in quantity supplied due to this decrease in demand for whatever good we're talking about. And lastly, we can look at, say, a change in technology, some increase in the productive technology of some item. Let's say it's more robotics become prevalent in our production. Therefore, it's an increase in the supply of some good due to this technology. We now produce more units at a lower cost, and consumers are now able to purchase more at a lower price. Therefore, the price falls, the quantity sold in the market increase. So again, when the supply curve changes, price and quantity move in opposite directions, unlike when the demand curve changes. And this is important because this can help us now to deconstruct what happens when some change in the market occurs. So for example, let's take a look at these 4 different possibilities. In the upper left-hand corner, an increase in demand. In the upper right-hand corner, a decrease in supply. Notice that the price changes in both of these instances. But in the upper left, the quantity increases, where in the upper right, the quantity decreases. In the lower left, we see an increase in supply, therefore the price falls. And on the lower right, we see a decrease in demand, price falls. But again, notice that the quantity goes in different directions. So what we can do is to understand how things will change and what's going to change, we can deconstruct what we believe is going to happen. So for example, let's take an issue of let's say it's the market for peanut butter, and a drought destroys half the peanut crop in Georgia. So we're looking at the market for peanut butter and what happens when half the peanut crop is destroyed. First question to ask is, do I expect the price of peanut butter to rise or fall? Well, I think logically we would say the price would have to rise. So it has to be one of the two graphs on the upper part. It's either going to be an increase in demand or a decrease in supply. Given this drought, do I expect more or less peanut butter to be sold in the market? Well, there are fewer peanuts, and therefore there's going to be less peanut butter. The correct example is the upper right graph. It will be a decrease in supply, causing an increase in price and a decrease in market output. Therefore, we'd see that the natural disaster caused a decrease in supply. It's the upper right hand corner. Similarly, let's take a look at a situation where the market is for milk, and the American Dental Association comes out and says actually milk is not good for your teeth and it can cause cavities. Consumers would be less willing to buy milk. So it has to be one of the two graphs on the right, either the top or the bottom. That would be a decrease in quantity sold in the market. And given this change, would consumers be paying more or less for milk? Well, obviously be paying less, so it has to be the lower right hand graph. It's a decrease in demand. So when you're looking at changes, deconstruct what you believe is going to happen to the price and quantity sold in the market, and this will help you understand change in that market.